Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today on Got Transition Radio. My name is Mallory Cyr, and I'm the National Youth Program Manager for the Got Transition National Center on Healthcare Transition that is funded through a cooperative agreement with HRSA and the Maternal Child Health Bureau. My co-host, Eileen, is not able to be with us today, so I am very lucky to have a special guest co-host who also reigns from Colorado, Teresa Nguyen. And for those of you who may remember, Teresa was a guest speaker on our show a few months ago, and since then she and I have kept in touch and shared our own transition experiences and become pretty good friends. So I'm very excited to have her here with me today. Teresa, would you introduce yourself and tell our listeners a little bit about where you're at in your transition life?
Sure, definitely. Hi, everyone. I'm Teresa Nguyen. I'm from Colorado, as Mallory mentioned. And I was born with osteogenesis imperfecta, a brittle bone disorder that I'll reference a lot throughout the show. I'll call it OI for short. But currently, so I am 24 years old, and I have actually recently went through a crazy, insane transition that I will talk more about later on. But right now I am preparing for my master's. I'm just studying for the GRE, the entrance exams, and I am currently looking for a job. So a lot of kind of transition moments happening right now.
Great. Yeah, I can't wait to talk more about that. And for our listeners, we have been told that our voices sound remarkably alike, so we're going to do our best to make sure that you guys know who is talking, but hopefully since it's just the two of us, it'll be pretty clear. So also, Teresa was a listener on our last webinar that happened on November 7th, which was about how having a disability or special health care need impacts personal identity for young people who are going through transition. And it was such a dynamic presentation. We had some great youth panelists and some great professionals sharing their thoughts. And since we had such a great turnout and so many people had questions and comments, I thought it would be really great to continue that conversation today. So before we jump into that, I want to take a moment to explain how you guys as listeners can share your questions and thoughts during this episode, because we really want it to be a conversation and for you to share what's on your mind. So as you can see on the right of your screen, you should have a webinar control panel, and there should be a drop-down window that says questions. So during the episode, you can type any questions or comment into this box or the chat window, and Teresa and I will be able to see them and do our best to refer to your questions during the episode. And for all the questions or comments we do not get to today, they will be archived on our website with this episode. So with that, let us get started. And Teresa, I would love for you just to share your thoughts on the webinar that we had this month and kind of share your insight about the topic and how or whether you feel your disability has impacted your personal identity.
Sure. Again, this is Teresa. And I want to start off by saying that I really enjoyed all of the insight that the panelists provided us with in the last webinar. I think that there were some strong points made about identity and how it's really important to just kind of focus on who you are and not focus on kind of the box that society has created for you. I believe that the experiences in life contribute to your identity, and as a person with a diagnosis, our experiences will definitely vary from our peers. I know that OI contributes to what I get to experience in my life, and it definitely makes that a part of who I am. That is why I really like the point that was made by Dr. Weisbrun about experiencing life in kind of all of its vicissitudes. No matter what the experience is, there will always be a piece of it that contributes to your identity, who you are, and who you become. I've always believed that for every bad experience, there is a good experience to balance it out. And I kind of try to remember that, when I go through challenges. And I don't always embrace all of the challenges that are thrown at me at the time that they're happening, but afterwards I realize that those are the challenges that make me who I am and contribute to my identity. A recent event reminds me to definitely embrace all of the emotions and challenges that come with new experiences. At the beginning of this fall, I was offered a fellowship position at a prestigious nonprofit organization in Washington, D.C. It was an incredible opportunity, and I knew that I needed to do whatever I could to make the move from Colorado to Washington. I packed 2 suitcases and moved across the country. What I didn't realize was that one of the most challenging things that people with disabilities face in the city is finding wheelchair accessible and affordable housing. There were also many things to consider in addition to that. As a person with special health needs, I knew that I needed to be near a hospital, near public transportation, near work, and ultimately in a very safe neighborhood. Apparently, all of those things were very hard to come by in one package. And after a month and a half of starting the job, staying in a hotel, and looking for a housing solution, I turned down the position in DC and returned to Colorado. It's very easy to look at this and say that my disability got in the way of this transition to a new city. But it's harder to realize, I think, that it was because of my disability that I got to experience all of the wonderful things that happened in that month and a half. I met some of the most incredible leaders of the disability community, and I learned a lot from them. I was able to work on projects that were both challenging and rewarding, and I made some lifelong friends from the experience. It's really easy to get caught up in all of the frustrations, but when you take a step back, it puts everything in perspective, at least for me. I know that I don't regret this risk that I took, and it definitely has contributed to who I am. And that is kind of how I choose to look at a lot of things in life. And I definitely see every experience, good or bad, as kind of shaping my identity.
Yeah, that is such an intense experience. And I know that you and I had talked so much during that process and everything you were going through, trying to figure out if you were going to stay or take the job. And, I think it's so easy to look at things through a negative lens and say, why couldn't this work? Stupid disability. But, I think we both know that, and our panelists talked about this on the webinar as well, is that it's our disabilities and our chronic health needs that have given us this confidence and created these opportunities. I mean, if I weren't in my current situation, I wouldn't be working for Got Transition. I may not be going back to school. All of these things, and that has paved the way for where we are. And also, I just want to go back for 1 second. You used the word vicissitudes, which was a common theme in the webinar. And for those who haven't listened to it, I really recommend that you go on our website and check it out. There'll be a link at the end. But what that means is experiencing highs and lows and living your life and finding the balance between those experiences. And one thing is that for people with disabilities and chronic health needs, those vicissitudes are a lot more amplified. And I talked about this on the webinar, how they're not just small ups and downs like being in a traffic jam or, winning a raffle prize. It's more like having a severe health crisis and not knowing what's going to happen next, and then having an amazing advocacy opportunity that, it takes a couple of days to come down from. So I think just having that knowledge of sort of the perspective that we're looking at this from is really important to know. So, wow, Teresa, just thank you so much for sharing that. And I know we could do a whole episode on the things that you went through trying to find that housing and having that opportunity. But I think it's great that you were able to recognize what you needed to do for your own health, looking at those safety components and knowing what you needed and not doing things that would have impaired your safety just for the sake of the job. So that's
Definitely.
really important. So with that, I want to go a little bit deeper and talk about some thoughts that came up after the webinar. And I think it was a very intense topic that left a lot of people thinking about a lot of things. And one thing I realized was that average young adults aren't really asked those questions or encouraged or forced in some contexts to think about themselves on that level and do that amount of self-reflection at such a young age. You know, if you ask most 20-somethings or, 19-year-olds what the word vicissitudes means, they're probably not going to know. I mean, granted, I didn't know before the webinar, but once it was referenced to me, I went, oh, okay, so that's my life, basically. And so I think when we have these conversations and ask young people to think in these ways, we have to remember that there's also going to be some emotional implications from that amount of self-reflection. And like for you, Teresa, is that something that you sort of have come to like at a younger age of like being confident with your identity and like reaching that point, like versus your peers?
You know, I actually don't think that I became fully confident with my diagnosis until maybe around college time. But I do think that that is, to me personally, earlier than most of my peers about recognizing who you are and, um, you know, who you want to become, I guess.
Yeah, and so I think one thing is that enlightenment and that perspective is really like a like a double-edged sword, I think, because I'm sorry, I'm having some sound issues here. Those thoughts and experiences make young people a lot more mature and enlightened in a way than their peers, but that also can result in some social isolation where your peers don't really know what you're going through. And that's something that our panelists talked a lot about as well. Um, and feeling isolated at times and having a harder time finding people who really understand what you're going through. Um, and so I think in a sense, too, I sort of had the realization that it's hard sometimes for adults to be able to give that support because the experience is not shared and they haven't had the same experiences in their adolescence and growing up. They may be able to give some general advice, but when it comes down to it, growing up looks different for a young person with a chronic health need or disability than it does for your average teenager. So I think that also creates some struggles when you have less people that you can go to for support. Have you found that, Teresa? Like finding a certain core group of people that, as we say, get it or not being able to get advice from the same sources as maybe your friends do?
I definitely agree with, I definitely still have moments of isolation and not being able to kind of relate to my peers and my peers not being able to relate to me, when it comes to my disability and kind of living life with that aspect of it. Um, but I have definitely found a core group that of friends that ironically all have disabilities, but they get it. They understand kind of the challenges and the annoyances of the disability sometimes, and we kind of bounce off of each other with those frustrations. But we also take time to kind of embrace what we have and all of the experiences that we've gotten to have because of the diagnosis. But it's really good to if you can find that core group of people because I think it makes a difference. I have like this, you know, I guess strategy, if you want to call it that, to kind of turn to that core group every time, I need to talk and vent and, get out all of the frustrations that I have during that week or whatnot with them. I think it's really helpful. I couldn't do it without them.
Yeah. And I know our panelists talked a lot about that too, of having that support system within certain groups. But on the flip side of that, and something that you and I have talked a lot about, is the idea of forcing yourself or trying to fit into a certain category of people with disabilities. Like there's another level of identity that is within that community. So what are your thoughts on that idea?
On needing to fit into the disability box, you
Yeah,
want to
and
say?
how you kind of react to that.
You know, I think, well, first off, I definitely feel the pressures from society to be the stereotypical person with a disability. Um, every day, I definitely feel those pressures. And I guess, in a way, those pressures kind of make me want to challenge those expectations a little bit. I don't want to be, a lot of people tell me that, because I'm so small, they don't really think that, I have the intellectual capacity to go to college or to go to work or whatnot. And I guess those are the things that challenge me to do that even more, to become even more educated and to apply myself in, I guess, more of like an advanced professional setting. I don't know. It kind of fuels me to kind of want to become more than that box. And I think that, I'm thankful to be a part of the disability community. I think it's a really unique community, and um, it's a very unique group that I wouldn't be in without my disability. But I definitely think it's important to realize that, you don't have to fit into that box if you don't want to. It's just the same box as being a quote nerd in school or the popular girl. Um, we're not robots. I think everybody is different, and you have qualities that contribute to a lot of boxes, and you have qualities that you just kind of uh, form for yourself, I guess.
Hmm. And one of our panelists talked a lot about that idea and how he kind of embraced that he didn't fit into a box and wanted to create his own category. And we actually have a question from one of our listeners that says, many disability support groups and organizations are organized based on disability. So do you think that groups should maybe rethink this approach and come together in mutual support or from a different perspective?
This is Teresa speaking, and I definitely always think about, the different disability support groups that are organized. And while I think it's important to kind of have a unique circle for your disability, ultimately I think that everybody with a disability somehow, in some way, is facing the same challenges, even if your disability is not the same disability as your friend. Um, and so I do think that ultimately I would like to see more groups kind of forget that exclusion per se or exclusiveness to the type of disability and kind of come together as just people, um, kind of sharing and exchanging their challenges in life or their successes or whatnot as people and not as this, diagnosis or disability, if that makes sense. What do you
Yeah.
think, Mallory?
And for me, this is Mallory. I was I have a rare genetic disorder, and there's very few people who have it. So I always joke about how I'm one of those people who don't have a category. So I have sort of not had a choice but to find groups and support systems based on maybe broader medical aspects or other common interests. And so our panelists who were on the webinar actually met each other previously at a Face Forward conference, which is for young adults with mitochondrial and rare genetic disorders. So it's based on having a condition, but those conditions are very broad. And the cool thing to watch is how those young people realize that even though they all have different diagnoses, they have so much in common. And so I agree as well. And I think that with support groups sometimes, and this sort of can lead into another question that I have, I think it's important to think about those common threads beyond your disability or your diagnosis. A lot of groups that I have been involved in or encountered, I didn't really feel like I had a strong connection with them because a lot of the conversations were only around their illness or having a disability. And for me, I have so much going on in my life that although it's a primary piece of who I am, my medical condition is very secondary to how I live my life. It's what I do, it's a part of who I am, but it's not the center of my day or, the center of who I feel that I am. So my question to you, Teresa, that I've gotten from other young people is, how do you make sure that your disability doesn't sort of take stage center or really create who you are and dominate all aspects of your life? Or is that something that it does? I'm curious. That question really gave me some food for thought, and so I'm curious what your thoughts might be on that.
Definitely. I think that it's really tempting, at least for me, I think it's tempting for everybody to kind of get lost in talking about themselves and, kind of centering a lot of things around yourself. And so for me, myself, my diagnosis is part of that. And, when I kind of take a step back, I think that it's really important to me to kind of embrace what I have. I don't love it always, but I am comfortable with it because it is a part of me. And I guess I make it a goal to kind of, in my day-to-day interactions or I guess in living life, that I usually address what needs to be addressed with the disability, and then I make it a point to move on because it is really easy to kind of, again, get sidetracked and focus on a lot of that throughout your life. But, I remember that, for instance, when I'm in school to learn and to get an education about, health and about the body. I was a physiology major, so I focused a lot on that. Obviously, throughout classes and whatnot, I needed accommodation, so I needed to address my disability, but, in a way that it I guess didn't take over me, and it was just another aspect of me, like um, my studies were another aspect of me, for instance, and that kind of helps me, I guess, is just to kind of remember to move on, address what I need to, and then move on, because there is so much more of me that I would like people to know and get to know than just OI.
Yeah, that's so well put. We actually have a couple other questions that I would love to get to. One question is, should such groups separate physical and mental disabilities, or are there meaningful commonalities between these two types of disabilities?
I'm going to have to think about that. Mallory, do you have an answer?
I can share some thoughts. Yeah. I think, as I said before, finding common threads beyond just diagnosis, I think is really important. And I think depending on the objective of the group, or, what the purpose of that group is, I think it would be great to have cross disability. I know in my personal experience that when I have gotten to spend time with people who have different types of disabilities, it's been hugely educational and inspirational and just really impacting in what I can learn from people who don't live the life I lead, or who have to access different systems. And where I am in a role to give input into various systems change, and share people's stories on a different level, I really value those opportunities to connect with people with different types of disabilities. And I think in society, and especially for young people, the only way we're going to build tolerance and acceptance and, caring for one another is to learn and be able to spend time with people who are different than us. So I think the more separating we do, we're really just doing ourselves a huge disservice as society.
I really agree with that. And,
Teresa, what do you think?
you know, I I think that you kind of said it. As I think about where I want to go in life and about being a disability advocate per se, I think it's really important to kind of learn and gain perspective from all aspects of disability. So whether or not that's physical or intellectual disabilities, I think it's really important to kind of merge those two groups, if there are two groups, and learn from each other, because I think it's really important to kind of give a voice to perspectives that you haven't really had to face in your life. I think it's a really good educational experience as well.
We have another question that sort of refers back to something that I wanted to talk about and sort of skipped over, and then we have to wrap up, unfortunately. Do you think young adults with disabilities have added struggle in finding their identity than their able-bodied peers, or is disability simply another issue to work through, like other problems that teenagers have, like family and such? And I think this is such a great, huge, encompassing question. I think on the one hand, disability or diagnosis really just amplifies the regular everyday struggles that they're already going through as teenagers and adolescents. So when they are trying to deal with family and school and relationships and moving and all those things, it does really make it harder. I think also for young adults without a disability, it's sort of almost something that's more like taken for granted, I guess, when young people sort of go off and say, oh, I'm finding myself, this is my time to goof off and find myself. And for young people with disabilities and healthcare needs, they don't they don't have as much freedom in that process. You can't just up and move and hope you're going to make it somewhere. You really have to have your ducks in a row while you're finding yourself. And you can't take the same risks as everybody else without preparing, properly. So I think it is definitely harder, but I think there are also a lot of the same challenges that are just amplified.
Definitely. I agree with all of that. I think that it definitely, a lot of teens and young adults, I think, don't realize that, living life with a particular diagnosis can present a lot of challenges that are maybe urgent or that need to be dealt with in the moment instead of taking time and finding the right time to deal with it. And so I think that's what differs the challenges with a disability to the normal challenges that a young adult faces, is that you kind of have to deal with things as they come instead of, setting aside time slots to deal with A, B, and C in your life.
So we have one last question, and that's what I want to end on because we're just about out of time. And this person wrote in, teens with similar physical limitations to me seem to be impossible to find. I think maybe they are not putting themselves out there to meet others, but I really want to establish friends that I can relate to and that understand me. I don't know where I fit in, and it's hindered me individually and socially. What are your suggestions? That's a really good question.
That's really good.
Do you want to take that one, Teresa?
Yeah, I'm trying to think about what I would do in your situation here. I agree with you, and I think that there are a lot of people with disabilities, physical or not, that maybe don't put themselves out there as much, in kind of because they're shy or they don't really know how to relate to other people. I guess my suggestion would be kind of finding your niche in other areas beside disability, through a hobby or through a lot of clubs, a lot of volunteering. I guess to me that would be my next step. I don't know. What about you, Mallory? What do you think?
Yeah, I was going to give the same advice and just start to look at yourself beyond those limitations and find people that you feel are that support system regardless of disability. And I mean, continue to do your research. There may be one person come down the line who is ready to build that community, or maybe you're that person. So, really continue to think about it, but also think about other things that make you happy and other ways that you can meet people. And you never know what you may find socially. So with that, unfortunately, we really have to wrap up. We're about 5 minutes over. But I want to thank everybody so much for tuning in. We have some questions we didn't even get to. Teresa, thank you so much for being on. Maybe we can do this again as co-hosts. And I encourage everybody to go on Gut Transition, listen to the webinar if you haven't, submit your questions, email me, email Teresa. Find us on Facebook, find us on Twitter. Stay tuned for information about the next radio show. And with that, I thank everybody for tuning in. And remember, every transition is unique, just like you. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.